encouraged to donate $1 and wear a pink shirt with jeans on every Thursday of this month. Last month, LPSS staff participated in childhood cancer awareness by donating $1 and wearing a gold shirt and jeans on September 1st and the 15th. Collectively, we raised $7,642. The following organizations each received $1,910. St. Jude, Miles Perret, American Cancer Society, and the Susan B. Komen Foundation. On behalf of the Lafayette Education Foundation, I'm pleased to share Truman has received a $1,000 initiative. It's called Matching Struggling Readers with Books That Fit, to purchase leveled textbooks. Each year, we discover students that are readers. Through this initiative, we can support these students and encourage more students to read. Board members, the 20 Under 40 Young Leader Awards program aims to honor Acadiana's best and brightest, those younger than 40 who help move Lafayette forward through their leadership skills and community service. For the fourth year in a row, the Daily Advertiser has proudly partnered with 705 to organize and sponsor the awards, along with presenting sponsor Capital One. We're proud to announce that one of the 2016's honorees is Acadian Middle School Principal, Mr. Roland Moore. He will be honored in a special 20 Under 40 publication and at an awards banquet set for November 17 at City Club in River Ranch. I'm pleased to report that due to the increased enrollment in Como High's Navy JROTC program, the program is now fully funded by the Navy. So congratulations to that JROTC program. What this means is that fully funded means it includes financial supports for instructor salary, cadet fees, uniforms, and travel. Congratulations to Unit Commander IT Charles Young and the Como NJROTC cadets for earning this designation. As always, we appreciate their color presentations at our board meetings. Thank you. This is a reminder to parents and students that the nominations for the 19th Annual LEF Teacher Awards is open until October 31st. A nomination can be made online at leffoundation.org or with the paper version obtained from a school. Recognition of the finalists will occur in January 2017. The Charles Burke Elementary students are making their mark on the world at their school library. On September 30th, 124 fourth grade students participated in Dot Day projects. The Charles Burke Library received a grant from the Acadiana Center for the Arts that allowed the students to integrate art, literature, and technology. The Dot by Peter Reynolds is a book that encourages people to express themselves and that what they do makes a difference. Roz Fisher, a local artist, taught the students painting techniques using watercolors and oil pastels. Charles Burke students are making a difference in our world. Dave Baker will be using this article on Cool Schools on Friday, October 7th. The segment runs from 6:30 to 6:40 a.m. on Good Morning Acadiana. Tune in, please, if you can. Speaking of dots, how about dash and dot robots? Coding is the new team sport for future tech leaders and innovators. From October 17 to mid-December, children in teams of up to 5 will design solutions to real-world science and technology challenges by programming and building extensions of their dash and dot robots. Top teams will be invited to compete in the final round in spring 2017. Madame Catherine Muratori is piloting this Wonder League Robotic Club this year with her third grade class at Prairie Elementary School. There are 4 teams registered for the competition. This week, the teams are learning how to control the dash with the Go app. The students were very excited to start coding and manipulating their dash and dot robots. It is recommended to have 1 set per 3 to 4 students. The cost for the basic set is around $900 for 3 dash, 3 dots, 3 xylophone, launcher, and brick attachments. And if you don't know what I just said, just go ahead and Google dash and dot, and you will see cute little robots that third graders across the country are learning to code. And lastly, I want to tell you that we are absolutely paying special recognition this week to educational diagnosticians. The week was declared by a proclamation from Governor Edwards. We appreciate those individuals in our professional organization. We thank them for the service they provide to our students. And the last item is to tell you that our October 1 enrollment count for the district has been collected. We counted 29,616 MFP students on October 1. That's an increase of 192 students from the prior year October 1 count. So congratulations to the Lafayette Parish School System. Many districts are reporting declines in enrollment. We, by contrast, are reporting a significant increase. And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aguilar. Come on and take your seat, Ms. Boudreau. You don't think I'd let you sneak in, do you? Items on time-sensitive introductory items. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. President, I move that 2.1 and 2.2 be moved to the regular action agenda.
Okay, we have a motion and a second that items 2.1 and 2.2 be moved to the regular action agenda. Any questions or comments concerning those two from members of the public? From members of the board? Madam Secretary will call for the vote.
Seven for, none against.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. We'll move on to approval or pulling of action items. I'll read the action items, and then those of you who wish to pull any of them, please so indicate. And we're gonna include those two items that we just we're going to include them on the action item. So I'll read them. They'll move at the bottom. Okay. All right. 3.1, approval of a new job description for food service office coordinator. 3.2, GBM personnel transfer policy.
Pull that, please.
I want to pull 3.2. 3.3, request for approval of grant submission. 3.4, request for approval of grant Believe and Prepare Early Childhood. 3.5, Capital Improvement Fund Budget Revision. 3.6, Construction Fund Budget Revision. 3.7, Construction Fund 2012 Limited Tax Bond Budget Revision Number 1. 3.8, General Fund Budget Revision Number 1 for fiscal year 16-17. 3.9, Self-Funded Construction Fund Budget Revision Number 1 for 2016-17. 3.10, Special Revenue Fund Budget Revision Number 1, fiscal year 2016-17. 3.11, half-cent sales tax fund declaration of excess reserve payout to teachers for the year 2014-15.
Pull it.
Pull 3.11. 3.12, approval to advertise and bid Milton Elementary Middle School interior. Help me with that, Jeremy. That Q Road. Oh, that's a lot of letters just for the Q. I thought it was cook or something in French. I don't know. 3.13, approval to advertise and bid S.J. Montgomery Elementary fan coil units replacement. 3.14, approval to advertise and bid Judy's Middle School waterproofing. 3.15, approval to advertise and bid Lafayette Middle waterproofing. 3.16, approval of quotes for Truman Early Childhood Center parent driveway paving. 3.16, approval of quotes for, 3.17, approval bid award, band instruments, bid number 05-17. 3.18, approve bid award, pallet rack, bid number 13-17. 3.19, approval of servitude agreement with the City of Youngsville for water sewer to Southside High site. 3.20, approval to purchase vacant property at 100 on the 100 block of Digby Avenue, adjacent to Como High School. 3.21, revised project listing, $126 million of bond issuances. 3.22, approval of resolution 10-16, 1889, oil industry litigation.
Pull that one, please.
Okay, pull 3.22. 3.23, general fund budget revision, request to add a school safety officer.
You pull that one.
Pull 3.23.
Mr. President, I move that we approve of.
Yes, Dr. Aguilar, Mr. Guidry.
Okay. Yes, I was going to ask the board to consider pulling 3.21, the revised project listing, $126 million of bond issuance, to allow some discussion there.
Okay.
If y'all would consider that.
Consider it pulled. I'm looking, it says approval of all action consent, but we have two others, don't?
It's approval of correction of job description, marketing and recruiting coordinator, and then the next one is temporary campus for Westside Elementary.
Thank you, Mr. Latchley.
You're welcome, Mr. President.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve those items not pulled?
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we approve all items not pulled.
Did pull 3.25, right? West side.
West side. Can they pull? All right.
I've got them.
So what we have pulled, Ms. Melva, is 3.2, 3.11, 3.21, 3.22, 3.23, and 3.25.
I second Mr. Latchley's motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve all items not pulled. Any questions or comments on this motion from members of the public? From members of the board? If not, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote.
Eight for, none against.
Okay, motion carries. The first pulled item was item 3.2, personnel transfer policy. Mr. Centini.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the policy replacing paragraph 1 with the following text. The superintendent or designee may transfer any employee, including personnel employed as principals and supervisors, from one position, school, or grade to another by giving written notice to the employee of such intention to transfer. Such transfer shall not be for political or personal reasons. In no case shall seniority or tenure be used as the primary reason when making any decisions to transfer an employee. In order to preserve the quality of instruction, no transfers of instructional personnel shall be initiated during the regular school term, except in emergencies or promotional instances once a suitable permanent replacement has been identified. And I gave that to Ms. Melva already, so she didn't have to type it.
We have a motion on the floor. Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Mr. Latchley, did you second it? Mr. Broussard, I'm sorry. Any questions or comments from members of the audience concerning the motion? From members of the board?
I'll give you a slight justification for here.
Sure.
This is in no case shall seniority or tenure be used as the primary reason when making any decisions to transfer an employee. That language comes straight from the Louisiana revised statutes. And then the second addition to the policy would be the promotional instances once a suitable permanent replacement has been identified. I feel strongly that we should not be promoting employees out of the classroom midterm when we have not yet identified a permanent replacement for those children. So that's why I propose these changes.
Any other questions or comments from members of the board? Yes, sir, Dr. Chasson.
Who are you trying to call out?
I have a question for staff. Quick question. We also have a displaced policy as well? I just wanted to ask that question. We do have a separate displaced policy.
I don't have that document with me, Ms. Thibodeau, coming up front.
Oh, no,
sorry.
just a yes or a no. I was just curious if we do have a separate displaced policy.
I would have to go check. This is the policy we use to display. And my understanding, the reason we put up the policy is that we can use seniority for transfer, just not RIF. But Ms. Boudreau would have to elaborate on that. That was my understanding, that we could use seniority. And the teachers I had a lot of teachers come to me upset because they were transferred or displaced because of the compass score, and they didn't think that was fair. So that we were trying to go to something we could use with the exception of the and not use compass. So Ms. Boudreau,
What's the question being asked?
I'm asking Ms. Boudreau. I was just, Mr. Santani had quoted the statute, and I was working with Ms. Boudreau on the policy, and I was under the understanding that we could use seniority to transfer.
I'll answer
I can answer.
The language actually says it cannot be used as the primary reason
for
when making
transfer
decisions
or RIF.
For transfer.
Okay. We would not want to break the policy. That was not our intent.
Yeah, Mr. Latchley?
The question I had and I received today was, okay, we're going to rezone.
Right.
All right?
That's why this is so important.
We're going to have displaced teachers, or, you got a school that's getting cut students, so teachers have to move. Some of the teachers I spoke with today were concerned that, and I don't know exactly how compass works, but let's say we have a teacher with a 3.9 compass and is a 2-year teacher, just out of college, doing great, doing good. We have a teacher with 15 years with a 2.9. Will that 2.9 teacher with seniority be kept? Is that what the policy is stating, that they'll be kept over?
They'll be the one that would be displaced, the one with a lower compass score, and that's what we were going through. Okay. That's why we were trying to accommodate the teacher. But we can't break the law. I by no means. But I was always told the superintendent could transfer. But Mr. Santani just proved me wrong. So that I thought that was just
transfer. No one's saying the superintendent can't transfer an employee.
So
that's just some of the questions and concerns I received today,
right.
And I just wanted to get it clear on TV, on tape,
right?
Everything that,
and you're right, and that's why that was our intent, to help the teachers. But I understand we can't break the law. That was so.
Of course not. And our goal is to keep the best and the brightest, and we're trying to become an A school district, and we have a lot of good young teachers that were concerned that if there was a rift that occurred or transfers occurred, that they'd be moved because they didn't have seniority. But thank you for clearing that up.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments concerning the motion? Dr. Aguilar.
So it sounds to me like we're going to continue possibly using SLTs, because if we intended to honor longevity, and if that's not permissible, then what else would we use is the question I would need answered. And if it's not SLTs, what criteria would we use to determine which employee to transfer? If it's not tenure and it's not longevity and it's not SLTs, what's the criteria?
You had a comment, Mr. Latchley?
I can make the comment that the only thing this precludes is that it cannot be the primary reason. I believe you still have the freedom to use any criteria you like as long as seniority or tenure is not the primary reason.
But so I would recommend we get some guidance about what the criteria would be. I think our employees deserve to know what the criteria might be.
I mean, I think my statement is, would you prefer keeping a tenured teacher with 20 years seniority with a lower evaluation, less effective, or a teacher with 3 or 4 years that's off the charts on his or her evaluations? I mean, I know what I want in my schools.
Could I make a comment?
One second, Ms. Thibodeau. I think we're getting a little off track here. Even in the previous policy, the revision that was given to us for us to approve as is, it doesn't state what the criteria is in there as well, because it eliminated everything. So we're just making it clear that it shall not be the primary reason. This is something that's in the law, so we just wanted to make sure that was in there. So don't preclude we're trying to say or not state what the criteria is, because the criteria isn't in the policy as well.
My only comment is we need some guidance.
Okay.
Hidalgo, you had your hand up.
Yes, I want to hear what Mr. Centeni has to say here next, but I do want to ask, especially Mr. Latchley and others who are speaking on behalf of the SLTs, just to remember a couple of things. It's going to be unpopular, but it is what it is. Sometimes, it just takes a fraction of a point to be lower than someone else. And because these are not strictly objective criteria that they're being judged by, sometimes you can take that opinion that we're concerned about right now and turn it into an SLT score, and then all of a sudden that's your transferred employee. So I agree with the superintendent, he needs clear guidance, but I also agree with Mr. Centeni that, you know, as long as it's not the primary reason, we're good, but also we don't want the SLT to be the primary reason. Because sometimes that really good teacher that you're talking about, that score might not be what the score needs to be, unfortunately, in some cases, or should be rather. Okay, and so then it's all subjective. And the attorney's chomping at the bit to correct me. So go ahead.
No, I'm not. In fact, that, if I might,
Sure.
When asked for our opinion with respect to the revision of this policy, we advised Ms. Thibodeau that the only criteria specifically for transfers should be basically what is one criteria. What is the best interest of the school system as determined by the superintendent? Not evaluations, not performance, not seniority or anything like that. So that was the opinion given to Ms. Thibodeau for revision of this policy. That is why, if you will see on the revision here, that entire paragraph was deleted. With respect to Mr. Centeni's putting that sentence back in, I would almost probably characterize that as probably a preference or on the part of the board, if they want to make that directive to staff to not be the first consideration for a transfer. However, it was also our opinion to not base a transfer specifically or primarily on, or at least to delete this paragraph as written on performance or evaluation, because at least as it's written, this doesn't even say who gets the transfer, the best evaluation or the worst evaluation. it can be read both ways, the way this paragraph is written. And it doesn't make it really didn't make a difference whether it was voluntary or involuntary. The policy made no difference whether it didn't distinguish who was going to get the transfer, the best evaluation or the worst evaluation. So that was the basis for our recommendation, obviously, to delete the entire paragraph. So that would be, as far as the presentation of the revision before any changes tonight, that's what Ms. Thibodeau based the revision that's being presented. As far as putting anything back in, I would say that those would be the preference of the board directed to staff. Now, using the word primary means that anything, any criteria that would be placed above seniority or tenure would be in compliance with this policy. Anything. So which if something that it kind of seems like certification, that's ahead. That's one thing right there. So it's not. It seems doable, is what I'm getting at.
Ms. Morris?
Well, in looking at the statute that I think formed the basis for the amendment by Mr. Santani, 1781A6, it gives the guidance to the superintendent that's needed. It says that the superintendent and school principal shall make all employment-related decisions based upon performance, effectiveness, and qualifications. This is with regards to hiring, assignment, or dismissal. And I think a transfer fits into the assignment because it's where that person is going. And then the language continues and says, in no case shall seniority or tenure be the primary criterion. So the way that I would read this is that the primary criterion should be based on performance, effectiveness, and qualifications for the particular position to which that individual is being transferred. So I think that the criteria that was passed out that you currently use would comply with the language in the statute. That's my opinion.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
I just wanted to make a point. I think they've made it, I think, if I understand you correctly, certification actually and qualifications will come first, and that always was the intent for certification and qualifications. That's always the first criteria that we look at. So if that's I think what you were saying, Ms. Boudreau, that we could go ahead and use the seniority after we considered certifications and sometimes qualifications, because there's special needs of students that a teacher may have a background in. So certification is always used first.
Mr. Centeni?
I would point out to Ms. Morris's point that the statute provides the guidance. Qualifications is one of the three. It says in performance and effectiveness as applicable to each specific position. So I agree with Ms. Morris. I think the guidance is right there in the statute. I hope everyone supports this change.
Dr. Jasso?
I'll defer to Ms. Amick. You can
Ms.
go ahead,
Amick? Okay.
I just had a question, I guess, clarification about the last part, promotional instances once a suitable permanent replacement has been identified. So if we have an instructional strategist position comes open and we have 18 teachers apply and they're the only applicants, and we find one of the best applicants is a classroom teacher, let's say a physics teacher, and we cannot find a replacement, I want to make sure I'm understanding that after a 2-week period, we would reopen the position and go through the process all over again?
I can answer that.
I think that's one of the reasons for what we're talking about is to ensure continuity for our students.
Right.
And if you pull them out in the middle of the year and you can't find a replacement, I don't think you're doing justice to the students.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that, again, clarification that the audience is understanding that as well.
Right. We're not trying to deny a teacher from moving up to a higher position, but at the same time, I don't want that to be at the detriment of the individual kids. Specific example, Lafayette High gifted chemistry. We're trying to avoid those situations where it's tough to find a chemistry teacher, let alone a gifted chemistry teacher. My question is, go back to the original question, which was, so do we or don't we have a separate displacement teacher policy?
I think she said that she uses
What she
this
said,
as a displacement
so we use
policy.
this one.
This is the policy we use, and I didn't give you a yes or no because I can't be certain that we did, we do eliminate policies as we go through, and I'm not for sure that was one that we did eliminate. This policy is the policy we're using.
Okay.
That takes precedent over the other policy because it was dated. But I would have to go check on my computer to make sure that we did actually, y'all formally voted to eliminate that policy. And I'll do
Dr.
that.
Sashawn, I've just looked on the personnel section of our board policies. I don't see one for displaced. The closest one I see is reduction of personnel.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Sammy. And then
Mr. Hidalgo?
No, wait, I wasn't.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Second question. What Mr. Latchley was talking about, rezoning occurs. We want to give the autonomy to allow what needs to occur. But my question is, it's F on the criteria. When staffing has been reduced, there will be a call for volunteers. So let's say a Lafayette High goes from 150 teachers, I'm going to just throw something out there, to 100. If there's sufficient volunteers, then everything's okay. If there's not enough volunteers, then we go through the involuntary teacher process. It says that'll be used. So that'll be certification, start back at the top, certification, and then we go through senior. My concern is I would really like to give the principal who's there on a day in, day out basis the autonomy to decide if I'm going to lose 10 teachers, let me decide what 10 I'd like to not necessarily lose, but don't tell me which ones are going to just be stripped from me. I'd like to keep those particular teachers, because if we're going to commission the principals to turn the schools around, superintendent has a job to make us an A school district. He commissioned the principals. Well, then the principals now have the job. They're there on a day in, day out basis. So when Ms. Sammy is at Boucher, when Mr. Craig is at Como, I mean, I would tend to think now, then again, I don't want you to go against maybe what the boss may necessarily say here, but wouldn't you like to have the freedom to say, I don't want to lose these 3 teachers. I want to keep this teacher.
So I guess I could tell you that superintendent, we had a principal's advisory this past week.
Okay.
Where we've been talking about these topics, Ms. Thibodeau and Ms. Cassidy, the principal at Southside, we're trying to find that balance of one of the existing schools and the possibility that they lose a number of teachers. On the other hand, the principal at Southside doesn't want to take all of the people that another school doesn't want. So we've been talking in several meetings with Ms. Cassidy, with the principal's advisory, superintendent, myself, to try to find that balance and try to find potentially a percentage of teachers that the Southside principal could select. Southside principal will also probably have to take some displaced teachers. The schools that are going to lose teachers, they have the concern, I don't want to be cherry-picked of the best teachers. And so we're listening, and we had that discussion this very week about that.
Okay. But no resolve yet.
Well, we're not quite ready, to have a final decision, but we're not going to allow a single school, as an example, to lose 25 teachers. So we're going to set maximum limits about how many teachers might leave Lafayette High or Acadiana High to go to Southside.
Mr. Hidalgo?
Yes, the last sentence I want to state that I agree with wholeheartedly. But Ms. Samick brought up something that I think is really important. What happens when her scenario comes to fruition where the best candidate is a teacher somewhere, but because the person can't be replaced in a reasonable amount of time, you have to start the process over? That means that, what are we going to do? We're going to take the second best option, to Mr. Lachale's point earlier. We're going to take the second best option and fill that position. Is that a liability on us? And secondly, what if that teacher gets upset enough and just leaves the parish? Now we have two positions that are empty potentially, and we didn't fill the position with the highest qualified person. It's potentially problematic. We just have to decide what is higher priority. It could go either way.
I think the highest priority should be the students. Mr. Kennedy, you had your hand up?
That's a really slick.
Well, I would offer that in no way do I view that seniority matters at all. It doesn't matter in industry. How long you've been somewhere matters not. The only thing that matters is your performance and your qualifications to perform your job. And so, I mean, I support this.
Mr. Lachale?
I want to thank Dr. Chasson for wording what I wanted to say much better than I was wording it. And yes, Mr. Hidalgo, the students will come first. But I think if you go into the process knowing this already, now I wouldn't say, I mean, if we promote a chemistry teacher and we can't find a replacement, there's no reason that is there any reason that chemistry teacher can't become an instructional strategist at the end of the semester if we find someone? We don't have to reopen anything. That person can be promoted, but you know from the beginning that it may take time. But I'm with Mr. Konezik, and that's a point I was going to make. In industry, the company I work for, I do not promote anybody by seniority, tenure, or anything. It's job performance, it's evals, it's the way they rate. It's the same way we do it in the military. Seniority adds points to it, but it's your overall eval and the way you know how to do your job. But thank you, Dr. Chasson.
You want another shot at it, Doc?
Yes, sir. To piggyback off of what Mr. Lachale said, I know we're saying, I think everybody got up in arms with us adding the non-seniority part as not being primary, but it's always been that way anyway. So I think everybody got a little ruffled when it's certification, then seniority anyway. We're just putting it in there to be clear. But as well, I don't like seniority being number two either. I mean, number one is certification. I would hope we have all certified teachers. In some cases, we unfortunately don't, but I would like to think that in these high capacity areas, certification, okay, are you certified? Yes. Well, that's number one's checked off. So everybody's certified. Then it goes to seniority. I don't want the person that's been there the longest. I just want the best teacher possible. So does every principal, so does every parent for their individual kid. So although this isn't the topical conversation of right now, we probably need to take a look at this in itself, because the seniority part of it, I mean, total employment commencing from first day of work within the parish, and total years at the base school, and total years in the parish. If I've got a teacher that's out of parish that is just clearly better than another teacher, then I want that teacher. I don't want seniority to have anything to do with it. And I don't think any parent we ask in this day and age would say, well, she's been in the parish for 20 years. No, I want the best teacher for my kid. So I'd like to look at this as well at the next board meeting.
All right. Any other discussion? If not, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote.
Eight for, none against.
All right, motion carried. The next item that was pulled is item 311, which is the half-cent sales tax fund declaration of excess reserve payout to teachers for the year 14-15. Mr. Lachale.
I pulled that one, sir. I want to make a motion that we accept option 1, lump sum payout for the teachers.
All right, seconded by Mr. Hidalgo, that the board opt for approve the option 1 on the teacher payout. lump sum payment. Any comments from members of the audience? And based on the emails that we received, option one is by far the most preferred item. So I would recognize those of you who wish to be recognized, but we'll recognize if you're going to talk about the same one, let's pick 2 or 3 of you. Anybody, any comments from the public? Any comments from the board? Yes, sir, Mr. Centeni.
Mr. President, and what will certainly become an annual tradition here. This is where I will vote against the lump sum payout, but try to make clear to all teachers involved that what I am actually voting for is a permanent raise out of this money, and I appreciate the fact that the lump sum is quite a bit of money, and I appreciate the fact that 85–90% of the people that have emailed us, there are teachers out there that want the raise. I promise you that, but they're greatly outnumbered for any number of reasons, from raising teacher pay in Lafayette Parish to a higher ranking relative to other districts, to after 20 years, this $500 that's in your salary year after year after year getting used to compute your retirement earnings, to there was a third one. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there are a lot of.
It's guaranteed.
Oh, it's guaranteed. Yeah, that's the most important one, because I would point out that the half-cent sales tax fund budget for this current fiscal year is budgeted at a deficit. We're a year in arrears on this, which is why we've experienced the decline in sales tax, and why option 2 shows, to Mr. Guidry's point, in the document shows that we would effectively be using one-time money to grant this raise. So I would point out that in the long run, my personal firm belief is that the raise with the smaller bonus check would be better. I'm very, very confident that I am in the great minority in this feeling. So thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome. Mr. Knizik.
So, Mr. Centani, I'm going to ask you to clarify something. You mentioned that the sales tax collections for this year are down significantly. And that indirectly means that next year it is highly unlikely that there will be any money to distribute in this distribution check. Right? Okay. So that means that we potentially could give out $1,300 this year and $0 next year. And potentially, if the economy doesn't change, it's $0 the next year. And hopefully things change by then. But what you're proposing is a permanent $500 raise annually for perpetuity.
Literally, I'm just voting against this, but I wanted to tell people why I was voting against it.
Right. Okay.
I'm not gonna bother proposing it.
I think you make total sense. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Latchley.
Mrs. Centani, believe it or not, I agree with you. I see the point, but I'm going to vote for what 85% of the teachers want is their money, and I understand next year and the year after there may be no money, whereas this raise would have been in the checks, but 85% want the lump sum, and they'll get my yes.
Yes, sir. Mr. Broussard.
I agree with him as well. The 85% and wanted $1,300, but the $500 yearly looks really inviting, and the thought that in a few years we may not have that $1,000, $1,300 to give out, it should be scary. But the people have spoken, and many of them went through some troubling times with the flood, need the money close to the holidays. So at this moment, the $1,300 look better than the $500.
No other discussion. Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote. I'm sorry, Mr. Guidry?
Yes, I would just ask if a board member would consider in that motion amending it to include that in order for a teacher to be eligible for this payment, they must be full-time and actively employed on the date of this excess distribution. This is something that's consistent with prior years, and it just clears up who's eligible for it, because otherwise it could lead to a lot of questions that would really be unnecessary. This pretty much draws a line in the sand as to who gets it. So
Not a problem. Could you add that, Ms. Melba?
Okay with you, Mr. Hidalgo? Yes. Mr. Second? Okay.
Because I wouldn't want to do that without you, Mr. Hidalgo. Got to stick together, me and you.
Mr. Centeni? You'll have to wait and see.
Mr. Angel, I have a comment or a question. Mr. Guidry, I think we had discussed at some point the timing of this distribution and how it affects, how the comment you just made affects people's decision whether they are going to resign or retire with the system, and how that can adversely affect hiring practices within the parish. Have we looked at changing the time frame of this distribution so that people that are holding on solely for this check end up doing that and end up leaving us at the end of a school year instead of the beginning of a school year?
I would say that the perfect time to do that is next year, when there will likely be no check.
Yes, sir.
It's a good point, Mr. Centeni. The history of this has been historically, prior to about 3 years ago, this distribution was made in May, and what that required was a projection, like in March, of how we were going to finish the year, so that that excess distribution could be declared in May and in the check process at that point in time. The point being, the Blue Ribbon Committee felt that money was being left on the table, so to speak, because when we made those projections, we were conservative. Because if the board made a declaration and those funds were not collected subsequent to that, then the outcome would not be positive. So that's why it was moved to October, to allow the actual collections through June 30 to be booked and known, so that calculation can be based on the actual collection. So that's the history of it in terms of...
It's not like the money goes anywhere. I mean, the money's still there. That money, that excess or
it would just be distributed in the subsequent year. Yes.
Right. But then we don't have issues with hiring and people quitting right when we're starting the school year, or resigning or retiring.
We could research to see how much of that we actually do have. The comments I've heard, and they haven't been a large number, but it's been more along the lines of, I retired, effective the end of the last school year, worked the whole school year, and yet I'm not eligible for it. So the comments I've heard have been more along the lines of it didn't affect their decision to retire. They retired at the end of the year. They just felt that they should have been eligible, and I explained to them that when they retire, they're removed from our current payroll records, as well as the retirement system, which is a requirement. Retirement system, when they retire, at that point in time, they start receiving retirement benefits. So we can't come back in October and say, let's undo all of that, for this one check. That's been more of the discussions. But to address your comment, we can look at how many we have around this time of the year, and we can come back with a proposal as to how a different timing. We could go back to the previous timing if that would be a preference of the board. So we can come back and just maybe as an information item have some further discussion for next year.
Thank you.
We do that.
I think we had to refresh and or revote. Did everybody do that?
Seven for, one against.
There's your answer, Mr. Centeni. All right, the next item that was pulled was item 3.21.
Mr. President, I move that the board approve the revised project listing relating to the board authorized issuance of $126 million of bonds.
We have a motion and a second that we concerning the revised project listing of $127 million of bond issuances. Any questions or comments from any members of the audience? Members of the board? Mr. Guidry.
Yes, one of the things that a couple of things we're gonna need some direction on, because we're at a point where we have to decide how many bond sales we're taking a look at, when should those bond sales occur based on when the construction would occur. And so, with the exception of the high school, we're almost at a standstill as to being able to make that decision and being able to move forward with, say, the Milton project, and because that dollar amount, we don't know if it's the final dollar amount, at this point in time, being able to move forward, say with plantation, that sort of thing. So what would really be of great benefit to us is if the board could give us some directions and solidify some of these numbers. In other words, we've approved the high school already. We're approving Captain Drexel at the cost that's currently reflected, or whatever dollar amount the board wishes it to be. As you notice, there's about $16.5 million that has not been allocated yet. Now, we have to keep in mind that only $500,000 has been allocated to the Como Performing Arts to allow some work to be done to come back with an estimate. So of that 16.5, potentially, there's another 5.5 million to maybe 6.5 million, just depending on what the board decides, that would need to be allocated, should the board choose, to the Como High Performing Arts. But then we have we need some direction on the plantation and the remaining 9 million or so that has not been reallocated, so that we can get a handle on when the bond sales need to be scheduled. So because that's a 2 or 3 month process, and we want to make sure that the funds are available when those construction draws start for the Milton project, for the Performing Arts project, that sort of thing. So we're getting to a point where we're going to need to sort of come to a conclusion as to how we're going to allocate that additional 9 million or so, and how much are we going to allocate to the Performing Arts, and what do we want to do with the plantation project. So I don't know if the board would be ready to do it tonight, or at least give us some direction, to come back at a meeting in the very near future, because at some point this is going to become a roadblock to the progress of some of these projects.
Mr. Centini?
Mr. Guidry, I'll offer to have a finance committee meeting and discuss this in depth so that we can make a recommendation for the board. But I do have a couple of questions just in general. What is the, I guess, organizational or lead time for a bond issue? Basically drive at how quickly can you get it done? How difficult or costly is it to do multiple bond issues? With the way that we're financing these bonds to the federal government, is that a possibility? I know does that mean we're not selling in the market now because we're selling to the federal government?
Well, where we are right now is we haven't concluded on the USDA funding. Matter of fact, we've actually run debt pro formas as though we do not receive that funding. Just in the event that we're not successful in completing that process. We hope that we will be, but there's no way to tell. Right now, what we're having to do, we're on the back end of the process, but what we're having to do is go back and address the fact that typically the USDA becomes involved before the project even begins. That's not what occurred here. The project was well underway before they got involved. So some of the issues that have come up is now we're being asked to go back and get certain contractual amendments made to every contract signed, meaning every subcontractor and the general contractor as well, and the architect. We feel good about it, but until we actually meet with all of those individuals, all of those companies, we can't guarantee what the outcome's going to be. So with regards to that, we do have some performers that have been run if we have to go to the market for all of the financing. And to answer your question, excuse me, if everything goes well, if there are no interruptions or things that just sort of hold us up as we go to, if we have to go back to the State Bond Commission, it's normally about a 2.5 month process to go to the market. And so right now, with regards to USDA, that contract, we started making draws on it, or started funding it back in March. So we're reaching a point where we either need to conclude, and we've communicated this to USDA, we either need to conclude this application process or not, because we have to make a decision as to whether or not we have to sell the bonds out on open market. So within the next couple of months, that will have to pan out. But it's about a 2.5 month lead time if we were to sell the bonds on open market.
And then a secondary question, if I might. Sure. If the USDA application process does not pan out, does that mean we go back to $126 million from 143?
What this is what it would mean. If you left everything the way it is and said, what's the difference between the USDA funding and the second sale of sales tax bonds? Because if you recall, the USDA funding was only for the high school. The remaining projects were going to be sales tax revenue bonds. If we took those numbers and compared to just selling all of the bonds on the open market, what would the difference be? Well, that difference would be approximately $5.5 million. We'd have $5.5 million less to spend on the surface, initially. And what I mean by that is, when you do that initial comparison, that's your answer. That's not to say that if we did have to go with the Plan B and sell all of the bonds on the open market, that $5.5 million could not be made up. What we would come to the board with is a couple of options. Do you want to reduce it by $5.5 million? And this is what your debt service would look like over the next, 35 years, because that's the length of the longest bond maturity. Or do you want to modify the debt service so that we do generate that additional $5.5 million, and there needs to be no reduction in what's available for the projects? So if you compare it, apples to apples, it's about a $5.5 million reduction. But the point I'm making is we can make up that $5.5 million on the open market. There's just going to be some additional debt service requirements that the board's going to have to decide whether or not they're comfortable with it. And I hope that answers your question.
It does, and I'll be happy to, however you guys feel would be the smoothest way possible, if it's a finance committee meeting to hash this all out before we get to the full board, or if it's just at the next board meeting. That's fine with me either way.
I would like in the future, and including this, on this particular item, that we do go in front of the finance committee, because it's, what you brought up tonight is new to, I think, well, to me anyway, I think it's new to most of us, and given the finance committee a means of digesting that information, would be, I think, the proper channel.
Mr. President.
And that would work well. I just want to give one more example. Depending on where how these funds are allocated, let's say that there's a project that's not even on this listing yet.
It'd be like Evangeline.
Say like Evangeline. We would look at it to where we would timeline the construction from the hiring of the architect to the design and drawings, so that when we sell the bonds, we don't have a considerable portion of those bonds sitting there waiting on construction draws. We're going to try to time it
to where we meet the needs of all of the projects and minimize the amount of time we're paying interest and not drawing those funds out. So that's why we need to have an idea of what the projects are so we can timeline all of them and decide where's the best, what's in the best interest, what date, what month to sell the bonds so that we can minimize the interest costs.
Mr. Knizik.
And whether it's the finance committee or the whole board or staff, my recommendation is that we try to, outside of the need that we still have at Como, that we just focus on how we can address some of the start addressing some of the temporary classrooms at some of our facilities, including potentially Evangeline.
Okay, if there's no more discussion, we'll call for a vote, Madam Secretary.
Eight for, none against.
Motion carried. The next item that was pulled is 3.23 by Dr. Chasso. Dr. Chasso. I'm sorry. I skipped 22. Oh, I'm sorry. 3.22, approval of a resolution 10-16-1889, oil industry. Mr. Knizik.
Mr. President, I move that we approve Resolution 1016-1889, oil industry litigation.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion. Mr. Centeni second the motion? And a second by Mr. Centeni that we approve the resolution 10-16-1889 concerning oil industry litigation. Any questions or comments from members of the public? From members of the board? Yes, Mr. Knizik.
Well, my first question was just going to ask Dr. Aguilar to read the resolution.
I'll be happy to. Resolution 10-16-1889, oil industry litigation. Whereas we have long recognized the need for increased hurricane protection, flood control, and coastal restoration to protect our families, workers, businesses, and communities, and that the long-term solution to the complex and multifaceted challenges facing our coast lies in collaboration, not litigation. And whereas the oil and gas industry is already the state's #1 private investor in Louisiana's environment and coast, having contributed more than $4 billion to the state for coastal projects since 2009. And whereas many of these industry-supported projects are already underway to help make us safer and stronger, and whereas starting in 2017, the industry will invest up to $200 million a year to support even more coastal projects across Louisiana. And whereas more lawsuits will only divert critical time and resources away from the industry's ongoing support of Louisiana's coastal restoration efforts, and whereas an extensive administrative review process for all permits for operation and exploration of our natural resources exist, so any issues or concerns regarding permit compliance can be addressed by the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources through the administrative review process without the excessive delays and exorbitant legal costs that come along with litigation. And whereas the sue and settle approach that is currently being discussed is short-sighted and unwarranted, and whereas the communities in our region are major hubs of oil and gas activity, serving as an economic engine for the region and the state of Louisiana, and the product of our local workforce helps to feed and fuel the entire nation, and whereas, without question, filing more unnecessary litigation would put these investments at risk at a time when our region and our state can least afford it, and whereas we should be working together with our industry partners to develop policies that encourage, not hinder, long-term coastal sustainability and economic growth, and therefore be it duly resolved, the Lafayette Parish School Board in regular session duly commenced. The Lafayette Parish School System does declare its intention not to file any lawsuits against energy producers that have operated in Louisiana as called upon by Governor John Bel Edwards, and declares its opposition to the Governor's request for parishes to file such suits.
Yes, sir. Mr. Knizik.
Well, I think the resolution speaks for itself, fellow board members, but there's a couple things I want to bring up. One is we certainly don't want to be party to biting the hand that feeds us. I think we've seen the direct result the absolute direct result lately of our revenue source, our primary revenue sources within this parish, and the sales tax collection and the dip since then, since the industry's been suffering. We don't need to be a part of threatening the prosperity of our lifeline industry. As mentioned in the resolution, the oil and gas industry has already spent $4 billion on state coastal projects since 2009. And litigation, I'm very well versed in litigation, unfortunately, being a business owner. But litigation typically ends in no one winning. The government entities suing the oil and gas industries, and the oil and gas industries themselves are only going to spend money, and that money is not really going to result in a more robust coastline for the state of Louisiana. And I come to you both, one as a board member, two as a businessman, and again, as I mentioned, my experience in litigation, but also as an ocean and coastal engineer. I mean, I was educated in coastal engineering at the United States Naval Academy and Texas A&M. So I know what I'm talking about when it comes to coastal protection and coastal engineering solutions. And then, for the state and other local governments, if you think about the history of how the oil and gas industry got to where they are and how they did business in the past, they were all issued permits. They were issued government permits. The government had a duty on behalf of the citizens, not only one, to issue the permits, but then to ensure the compliance with those permits. These same government entities that are involved in the litigation reap the benefits of the oil and gas production. So the government entities issued the permits, were responsible for ensuring their compliance, and then reaped the benefits of that work. But now, they've turned around and decided to sue because essentially they didn't do their own job. I think it's hypocritical and irresponsible. And I can tell you, our coastal problems are not caused by our number one industry. If you really want to look at the root cause of our coastal protection problems, and you really want to study it, you can look at our federal levee system. The United States government and our federal levee system for over 100 years has been starving South Louisiana through the Mississippi River and other tributaries, has been choking South Louisiana of our sediments for over 100 years. The focus needs to be more on sediment diversion projects to restore some of the natural sediment deposition to South Louisiana. So I respectfully ask the board to unanimously vote in favor of this resolution. Thank you.
All right. Yes, sir, Mr. Broussard.
You know, that topic has been on talk radio for quite some time. I just can't understand why the oil industry, and I'm in the oil industry as well, so I reap the benefit of the oil industry as well as you do. If they damage whatever coastline property, may it be land or water, why is it so difficult for them to understand to put it back as best they can? I mean, the sight of the work that they've done when they leave is an eyesore. But I just can't understand why they leave the land so messed up and agree not to fix it because they've got the permit and leave it up to someone else. So if you can explain to me why they feel they're not responsible for that, and I may see it your way, but I can't see if you mess up the yard, then you're obligated to repair it before you leave.
Well, one thing I want to make sure that we're clear on is that we don't want to stereotype an entire industry because of a few bad actors. I mean, I'll tell you, every industry has a few bad actors, and certainly there are oil and gas producers out there that have not necessarily followed the permits. But if you think about over time, things that were legal in the 1950s, right? Things that the state said, hey, you go do this, it's okay. Things that were legal in the 1960s, the 1970s, 1980s, all the way up till now, things change over time. But then to go back and to tell an oil industry, hey, you know what, we changed the rules. It's 2016 now, so we're going to change the rules and make you comply with today's rules for something that may have happened in 1950 or 1960 or 1970. So first is, we need to hold people accountable to the rules of the time. Second is that I don't think it is fair to stereotype an entire industry based off of a few bad actors. And I do not believe, with the amount of oil production that goes on in the state of Louisiana and offshore our coast, they are complying. They are complying with their permits. They have to comply with their permits. It is a stereotype, and also it is a method of where we are trying to use litigation, trying to use jury trials to award money taken from the oil industry when holding companies accountable to a standard that wasn't the standard at the time. And again, in the name of coastal restoration. The oil and gas industry did not cause what it is that we are seeing in southwest Louisiana. The Mississippi River that started being, the Mississippi River levee system that started in the 1700s, but really got federal attention and federal acts in the mid-1800s, restricting the flow of the Mississippi River, not allowing it to meander as it has for millions of years and nourish our coastline, and then pumping that sediment offshore is what is the root cause of our coastal protection. If someone wants to sue an oil company for something that an oil company does wrong, go ahead. That's your prerogative. But to develop this blanket, criticism and try to throw our primary revenue source and primary tax source under the bus in the name of coastal protection. How much of that money do we really think, if they do result in litigation and they are successful, how much of it goes back to coastal restoration? I can tell you right now, for these legacy lawsuits, very little goes back. Very, very little goes back. There's nothing that, if a landowner sues an oil company and that landowner wins, right? Wins to restore the environment that was somehow damaged. There is no recourse that requires that landowner to actually use the money to clean up their land. So, for instance, if there was an oil spill on your land and you sued the company and you got money for that because your land was damaged, you, as the landowner, have no obligation to fix your land. You don't. So the environment, right? We're all talking about the environment here in our coast. The environment doesn't benefit. This is a money grab, and I'm highly opposed to it. And again, the root cause of our coastal protection problems is not the oil industry. It is the restriction of sediment to southwest Louisiana or South Louisiana because of the United States government federal levee system.
If there's no other discussion, Madam Secretary will call for the vote.
Seven for, one abstain.
All right, motion carries. And now we'll go on to item 3.23, General Fund Budget Revision Request to add a school safety officer. Dr. Shussel.
I was just curious to know the reason why. Excuse me, motion to approve.
Thank you. Thank you. And second by Ms. Morris. Dr. Shussel?
Okay. It was a request from the principal at the Career Center. What we've done in the past is the SRO from either Paul Bro or Moss Prep, they just kind of go back and forth, and now that you got exiting pathways at two sites plus the Career Center, she's asking for the additional support and made that request to the superintendent. And we just want to, safety's always first and supervision, so he granted that request.
It's a general fund budget? Okay.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Mr. Broussard?
Is that going to cost us $70,000 per 9-10 month year salary?
180 days. That's salary and benefits.
For one person.
For one person. And it assumes 10 years of experience. If the person comes in with fewer years of experience, then that cost will go down some. We want to allow, for whatever individual we'd end up hiring. So we wanted to leave some room in the budget to go as high as 10 years. If it goes a little higher, then that amount will increase slightly, but not significantly.
Mr. President.
Ms. Morris? I'm sorry.
I have a question on why are we choosing a school safety officer and not a school resource officer?
There's a little less expensive. There's also a shortage of SROs through Lafayette Police Department. Potentially we could come back with an SRO instead. We talk about that periodically, but the principal felt that an SSO would adequately help her with her supervision and safety.
What's the price difference?
We have an MOU. I think a teacher, the SSO. Actually, they're probably pretty much a wash when you include the benefits, but I could be wrong.
So my concern is that, and for the audience and for the board, a school, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a school safety officer is a LPSS employee who acts basically as a facilitator of safety and discipline at a school. And during an emergency situation, would help facilitate the emergency response, yet this person is unarmed and not a commissioned officer of the law, versus a school resource officer who is a commissioned police officer at one of our city or one of our city police departments in the parish, or as a sheriff's deputy, and is armed and working in a similar but not exactly the same sense at a school. So I would always prefer and always vote for a armed police officer to provide protection at any school, especially today. So my recommendation would be to modify the requirement for a safety officer to a school resource officer.
Is that a substitute to the motion, or?
Well, it was more for discussion of staff, but yes, I would offer that as a substitute motion.
Okay, we have a substitute motion and a second by Mr. Latchley. Any discussion on the substitute motion? We'll vote on that first. Mr. Centeni?
You might understand that the difference in cost is negligible once you include benefits. Was that what I heard you to say, Mr. Craig?
Yep, Mr. Centeni, that's what he said, and really the only issue is availability of an SRO officer.
Okay.
So I think we would all prefer the SRO to be in place, assuming they're available.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, I would like to follow up on the superintendent's comment. So we have SROs available now. Like, if we approve this, can you get someone in there tomorrow, assuming
We would make the request. Sometimes they have to go through the training program to be available, so it's not a matter that we just call the city and they send us an SRO. The availability is very, very limited.
Okay. And as opposed to an SSO?
We would advertise and try to fill that position.
And what is typically your lag time between advertisement and finding someone?
About a month.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Dago.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, I don't want to muddy this down anymore, but Mr. Knezik, would you consider SRO, and if they cannot fill that spot in a reasonable amount of time, then allow them to move forward to advertise for resource officer, safety officer?
I'm fine with even modifying it so it says SRO or SSO, as long as we make do our due diligence to try to make it an SRO. And again, I want to remind everybody, pick a week, pick the news story. The latest one was a 14-year-old kid killed a 6-year-old boy, went on a shooting spree. Let's ask ourselves, what does the SSO do if there's an active shooter on the school property?
Run.
I mean, what do? I've talked to them, and their job is to distract the shooter. You're an unarmed person, and your job is now to distract somebody with a weapon. So that's one alternative. The other alternative, if we hopefully do our due diligence and maybe open it up to other officers, deputies, maybe reserve officers. I mean, I think we can. I think that we need to put deliberate effort into actually putting an armed officer in every school, but certainly we're at the point of making a decision for this school. There's a big difference between an armed officer of the law and someone who is trained in security and safety when the stuff hits the fan.
All right, any other discussion? If not, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote on the substitute motion.
Eight for, none against.
All right, motion carries. We have one other item that was pulled, item 3.25, which is temporary campus for Westside Elementary School. I've got Jeremy, but Timmy, Dr. Shasso, I'm sorry.
Marketing and recruiting coordinator.
We approved it.
I have a statement first, or / question, but I know you guys normally have a motion, but it won't take more than 10 seconds. My question is, we're being asked for a temporary campus, and it's whether you want to stay where you're at now in the actual facility or be in portable buildings back on Scott Meadows campus. And I would prefer to ask the parents, because it seems like that's what all the discussion has been about. I would just prefer to send a permission letter or some letter, period, home with the parents to say, hey, listen, here's the discussion. We're trying to decide whether parents want to be back in the Scott area in a temporary building versus a permanent facility. And I would just prefer to just send a letter home. It's fairly easy. Kid's name and parent signature, and what do you prefer? You want to be back on Scott's campus in portable, or a portable building, or permanent building?
You want to make a motion to that effect, Dr. Shasso?
Well, I'd like to hear. I know staff may have something to say about it. I was just curious to know if you guys had a timeline.
I'll make a motion.
We do.
I move that we approve the temporary campus of Westside Elementary School.
I second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second that we approve the temporary campus for Westside Elementary School. Dr. Aguilar, I give you the floor.
Yes, sir. Thank you. There is a timeline that's been estimated for the rehabilitation of Westside Elementary School. Early on, we thought we'd have these kids back in Westside by Christmas. We're still working very closely with our architect, our general contractor. The district's hired a FEMA consultant expert. He's here tonight, and I'm going to let him speak to what it is we're trying to do. The real issue is that it's going to take quite some time to rehabilitate Westside Elementary School. The very, very optimistic timeline is that these kids wouldn't be back at Westside until January of 2018. These kids are traveling at least 30 to 40 minutes each way, twice a day. We've got about a third of the faculty here tonight, they want this board to approve this agenda item. I think they want to be together again as a faculty and a family. Standing behind you is Rick Patterson. He's the Senior Program Manager for Whit O'Brien's, and he will speak specifically about what FEMA is asking the board to consider doing.
Good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. The idea of a temporary campus and FEMA participates in this, allows the school to function as a whole school. It allows the children to remain in their communities. And FEMA participates in that funding to bring that campus online. The issue is we're required to follow full federal procurement guidelines, which means we have to go through a procurement process. We have to get plans. We have to go through the fire marshal. So to get the temporary schools located on Scott's campus for use starting in January of 2017, we really need to begin that process today. And I don't mean to be an alarmist, but we've already started that timeline. And if we put this decision off for till the next board meeting or further, the likelihood of us being in that campus on January 1 for those students would be very hard to do.
Mr. Dago?
Yes, sir. You mentioned that FEMA participates in the cost.
Yes, sir.
What level?
This disaster is funded at a 90% federal cost share, a 10% local cost share.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have to agree with the temporary campus in Scott, because I mean we do have kids from West Side split between Scott Middle. I think we have K and First at Scott Middle, and then the rest are at MP Moss. And I wholeheartedly believe the parents of Scott, as well as the staff, want to be back home in Scott. And I mean, Miss Morrison's not here; it's in her district, but we're bookends. I really think she'd really support putting this campus back in Scott.
Dr. Shesso?
Everyone, please be clear. It's not that I'm not for it. Let's be clear, okay? All right. It's just, it's easy for a couple people to say that this is what everybody wants, as opposed to just asking everybody. And that would take a week's time. That's 7 days. So was my only question. I'm for whatever is the best thing, but if you get, how many kids does West Side have? If you get back 300 responses that say, no, we don't want our kids in portable buildings, fine. If they say, yes, please bring us back to this area, that's fine. But that was just my only request. I'm fine with whatever everybody wants to do. It's just a very easy thing to send home one piece of paper with every kid and getting the responses back. That's all I was stating.
Let's have order here. And Madam, I recognize you. Please give us your name.
My name is Christy Coffey, and I'm the PTO president of Westside. We would like to be back in Scott. I am here tonight with a few other parents, and I have been talking to numerous parents at Westside Prep in the car rider line to get them here tonight to tell y'all we want to be back at Scott. We want the portable buildings. I myself drive my kid to school every day, and it's because I can't put him on the bus. He has issues, and I also have a second child I drive to school every day, not mine, because she can't be put on a bus. She has issues. We want to be back in Scott. If it's necessary, we fill out the paperwork, we will, but please get the process going. We want to be back home. The 20, 30-minute rides a day one way, it puts our kids doing homework at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, especially the ones on the bus like Miss Nutt and Mr. Nutt's kids. It takes an hour to do homework. They're getting in bed for 8:30, 9 o'clock instead of 8, 8:30. it's a lot on us as parents. Yes, we know it was the historic flooding and what have you, but we want to be home. And I speak for a good number of us at Moss Prep. So I'm hoping y'all can take into consideration not sending letters home and just getting us the modular buildings we need and covering it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Very well said, ma'am. I think you represent those people who are here. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Dr. Chassel, while she's coming
Is everybody else here from West Side as well? Teachers or parents? Teachers, okay. I was just curious. Oh, principals here as well? Okay.
There's a principal there.
For the teachers that are here, y'all would prefer the portable building as opposed to the...
Well, wait a minute. Let me recognize the principal. Let's keep order.
Hi, I'm Lisa Thomas. I'm the principal at Westside Elementary. In preparation for the meeting tonight, I did send out a Remind 101 to the staff, just kind of asking what they felt about the move. And basically, they are torn. We all want to be together. That has been a big issue, the separation. It's kind of difficult managing two campuses, and also with safety reasons, just different things. So they're torn. Some are okay where they are, but I think the biggest concern is the thought of actually moving again this year. I feel like we still have not recovered from the first move. So I think maybe there are some questions that they would want answered in terms of, will they have to move? Will we have a lot of support in moving? When will the move happen? You know, those types of things. One other major question that I had not thought about, but that was posed to me by about probably five faculty members, was the temporary buildings, and in the event that there's some sort of tornado, anything like that. If we're on Scott Middle's campus, which I wasn't really sure about, then I guess that would be taken care of. I know there was some possibility of a talk of establishing a modular school on West Side's campus, but I'm assuming that that's not going to happen. So right now it's really just the logistics. Overall, we want to be together. We're just very overwhelmed about the thought of a move, but I know that hopefully there's a possibility that we can get a lot of support in that and in terms of the timeline. So I think I'm speaking for almost everyone who is here in regards to that. Okay. Any questions?
Oh, ma'am, that really did help me, though. It really did.
And I understand if we need to send out a remind or something, trying to get the consensus of most of the parents, I do understand that as well, because I have not had an opportunity to speak to a majority of the parents, so I understand where you were coming from as well.
But you offered a really great point that I'm sorry I didn't think of, as well, the consensus of the teachers and the staff there as well. Yeah. That's what I would like to get. So I'd like to offer a substitute motion.
Go ahead.
That the board send home a request letter with the two options, and that the results be tabulated and presented back to the board for a time-sensitive item for the next board meeting.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a substitute motion on the floor? Do we have a second to that substitute motion?
I'll second.
Eric. Mr. Knezik seconds the motion. Yes, sir, Mr. Broussard.
Once we get the result of that tally, Dr. Aguilar, if out of the 400 students, if 50 of them chose to stay, what does that do for, what does that do? If out of 450 of them decide to stay, the other 50 has to follow, what are we looking for? So what's the number? One more than half has to follow or stay? I mean, if 50 want to stay, do we have to accommodate them as far as teachers and all the facilities that's needed?
No. Majority.
Just a question.
Yeah, majority wins. Those who decided to send back the letter, majority wins. I mean, it's still the board's decision inevitably, but it's just like us being elected. Not everyone voted for me, but I'm the representative for District 4, so I represent everyone. So I'd like to get a great understanding. They can have meetings about it. It can be a clear discussion. I just want to get a clear consensus.
Mr. Knizik?
I have two questions. Dr. Aguilar, as a part of the temporary school, is there such thing as a temporary sidewalks, and then are there going to be temporary walkways for?
Yes, sir. In fact, they're actually planning to have a modular cafeteria in place for feeding these children. So they plan to provide all of the amenities, including perhaps playground equipment, sidewalks. They also plan, as part of that $1.3 million, to bring that area back to normal again after that modular campus closes out. So we're talking about something that goes on across the country, school districts that need temporary facilities. So the real issue is it's going to take some time to place the order, to get the modular units in, and then also to provide sewer and water and utilities and fire alarm and intercom systems. That's why that lead time is about 6 months at a minimum. But in talking to Mr. Patterson, we can wait a week, and what we'll do is we'll bring this back to you next week.
Okay, and one other thing that was brought up was a safety concern. These buildings would be rated, wind rated for the appropriate parish in Louisiana, would have tie downs, would have all of those safety requirements. It would be inspected and approved by the fire marshal. We would have to get a building permit. All of those same standard construction practices would apply.
If there's no other discussion, then Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote on the substitute motion. Ma'am, no ma'am, I'm sorry, I offered public comment, but we're voting.
Five for, 3 against.
Motion carries. So we're going to wait a week. It'll be on the agenda for next week.
Yes, sir. Time sensitive.
We'll send out the proper questionnaire.
Yes, sir. We'll do that tomorrow.
This concludes all of the agenda items on the meeting. I'm sorry. I'm going to declare this meeting adjourned.